Walking with Jesus, back to Capernaum tonight. Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. We're looking at verses 1 to 10. Yeah, let's start with you, please.
After he finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. The centurion heard about Jesus. He sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him. He loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house. The centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am unworthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." Jesus heard these things, marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such a thing. Those who have been sent returned to the house they found the Son of God."
The parallel passage for this is in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 to 13. You remember what we looked at last week concerning Jesus' authority. Where were we last week? The teaching on the Mount of Beatitudes. So if you will recall, Jesus is speaking about his own authority and that he's rejecting the authority of the Pharisees, the oral law. And this is what's going to give way now to the Pharisees in force rejecting Jesus, his authority. It's like Jesus threw down the gauntlet and the Pharisees picked it up and ready for the duel. I see a look of what does that mean? Anybody know what throwing down the gauntlet means? The challenge. Where does that phrase come from? Anybody know? Medieval. What is a gauntlet? Anybody know that? So the knight's metal glove, he would throw down the gauntlet, which would be basically saying, "I challenge you to a duel." And if the person he's challenging picked up the gauntlet, then it was, all right, duel on. So it's like Jesus threw down the gauntlet on the Mount of Beatitudes when he gave this sermon. It wasn't just a sermon to teach the people some better perspective on the Scriptures, although it was that. It was about righteousness, but it's speaking about the righteousness of God as opposed to the righteousness that was designed by the Pharisees, which was not a righteousness at all. It was a self-righteousness. So Jesus' authority is going to be rejected by the Pharisees as a result of that. But as we come now into Luke chapter 7, the first verse, Jesus has returned to Capernaum. And while he's in Capernaum, as he's arriving there, there are some who come to Jesus on behalf of a centurion. Now, centurion was what? Roman soldier. He was a man who was in charge of, some say, 100 men. There are commentators, there are historians that would say that would probably be more realistic to a number of 70 to 80 men, but the name centurion referring to 100. Nevertheless, this was a man who had authority over a good number of soldiers below him. And it's interesting that he doesn't come to Jesus, does he? Not the man that comes to Jesus. Who comes to Jesus on his behalf? The elders, the Jews, which is an interesting thing that the elders of the Jewish people came to Jesus on behalf of a Roman Gentile. Because there were Romans who were Jews, Roman Jews. Like Paul, the apostle, we discover in the book of Acts that he was a Roman citizen, but he was fully a Jew. He wasn't a Gentile at all. So they had no problem with Romans that were Jews, Roman citizenship. Their issue was Romans who were Gentiles, and even more so, Romans who were soldiers, because they were the ones enforcing the rule and the reign of Rome. So it's interesting that the Jews, the Jewish elders, are coming on behalf of this centurion.
I wonder if there's a disconnect. That it's surprised to have
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the ones that were challenging his authority most of all were the Pharisees. And the elders here, it would seem, were not of the Pharisee, the sect of the Pharisees.
Yeah, but I would have expected like an
Yeah, no doubt there was some influence. But when Jesus, what was his base of ministry? Where was he centered? Capernaum. There was a triangle. Basically, was the triangle of ministry, which was Capernaum. What are the other two towns or cities? Bethsaida, and Jesus is actually going to curse all three of these. Woe to you, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. So he centralized his ministry in that triangular area on the northern shore of Galilee. And Capernaum was his home base. So he did a lot of miracles in that region, and these elders would have been very familiar with it, more so than the Pharisees that were coming from Judea and throughout other areas of Israel. So that being the case, perhaps they had seen numerous family members healed, and as a result, they end up turning more in favor of Jesus than the Pharisees, who really didn't have a vested interest as far as personal interaction is concerned. Their personal interest was the oral law, and you are tearing it to shreds. Why more are these elders coming on behalf of this particular centurion?
he's benevolent.
He's benevolent, and in what capacity specifically is it? Okay, and what has he done for them? He built them a synagogue, and we've seen in the past that synagogue, or at least the ruins of it, in Capernaum. And here these elders are coming on behalf of this Roman centurion, and furthermore, it's not for the centurion himself, it's for the centurion's servant. That's something else that's a little bit, because in that day and age, servants were dispensable. They were, one dies, one gets sick, whatever, you replace it. Not him or her, you replace it. I mean, that's how they were considered most often. But this centurion doesn't regard his servant as just a throwaway. But this servant is valued, which shows the character and the nature of this centurion.
It also speaks of must have something. Has to look down on the Jews up around that Galilee area.
Mm-hmm.
to the different synagogues to raise some money to
Yeah, that's right. See, down in Jerusalem, they would basically, and Judea, they would look at the Jews of the Galilee as they're from the Hicks. They're from the sticks. They're from the backwater. They're from the, whatever the local terminology would be. They were the backwards crew. As far as those from Judea, and particularly Jerusalem, were concerned. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the main reasons, is because he was a benevolent man. He think about this for a minute. John the Baptist, he spoke to the Romans. Remember back in Matthew chapter 3, the Pharisee said, "What should we do?" And the Roman soldier said, "And what about us?" And what did he say to them? Okay, yeah. So let's go back there for a second in Matthew chapter 3. And let's look at maybe it's Luke. Maybe it's Luke. Yeah, Luke chapter 3. All right, so verse 14. "Do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely, and be content with your wages." So Jesus actually taught in the Sermon on the Mount last week, if somebody tells you to go 1 mile, then you are to go 2. What's he referring to there when he says that? No idea. Anybody have any idea what Jesus is saying in the context? I mean, for you and me, it's like go the extra mile, right? It's just being nice. You go the extra mile. But that comes from the teaching that Jesus gave. If somebody tells you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. What was he speaking there that they would have caught immediately, and how would they have responded to that? Okay, so it was law that a Roman soldier could impose upon any person in the empire, as long as they were not a Roman citizen, to carry their rucksack or belongings, whatever it was, for 1 mile. And there were mile markers on the roads. So the Romans had a very elaborate and intricate road system, and they had mile markers every mile, obviously. So if a Roman soldier says, "Take my stuff," then that person, and in this context, the Jew, the person who is subjugated, has to, they're implored. They have no choice, no other option, unless they want to be put in jail for the night or have more extortion the next time the tax collector comes around, because you can be sure that that soldier is going to assign himself to that tax collector the next collection. So how do you think the attitude of that Jew is going to be carrying that rucksack for that mile, the obligatory mile? Not very good. Right? But what did Jesus say to them? Go with him 2 miles. Because the moment, this is the Roman soldiers' experience every time, almost every time, unless they did it to Jesus or someone like that had a follower, who was a follower of Christ and had the mind of Christ, that as soon as that mile is covered, what are they doing? Take it. And it would have been with attitude. The ones that Jesus is speaking to now, they're like, all right, we're of a different spirit. We're of a different nature, a different mind. And so they would take it the 2nd mile. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the Jews' attitudes towards the Romans, and especially Roman soldiers, and especially Roman centurions, those who were in charge of the soldiers. But these guys, they are not only going and saying, listen, would you consider? They are promoting this man and his character, his benevolence. They're backing this guy. And as Jesus, as he's approaching the city, look at verse 6. As he's getting closer, he's not far from the house, that now the centurion sends out some of his friends to Jesus, and he says, don't trouble yourself. Don't come. You don't need to come to my house. I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. So not only is he very concerned and caring about the Jewish nation and about their observance of worshiping God, but he is humble as well. And he said, because I don't consider myself worthy for you to come under my roof, he says, that's why I didn't come to you myself. I didn't feel that I was worthy to come to you directly. Not that he was trying to get an in with Jesus because of the Jewish elders, but that he didn't feel that he was worthy to even come to him in person. Or perhaps the elders said, well, we'll go with you. And he says, I'm not worthy. We will go for you on your behalf then. And so this is what's taking place. And when he realizes that Jesus is not very far from his house, he sees him in the distance coming. He's like, quick, get out and tell him he doesn't need to come under my roof. This is not, I don't think, a self-depreciation. I think he's truly seeing himself in the light of his relationship to who the greatness of who this person is, Jesus. Here's what he said. He said, all you need to do is say the word, and my servant will be healed. Because I'm a man under authority, and I've got many soldiers under me. All I have to do is say the word, and it will be done. Say, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. Do this, and he does it. So he says, I know that it's no question, and I recognize your authority. So all you need to do is say the word. You see what is taking place here as Luke gives us the details here, and Matthew does the same. Presents this episode to us. It's a contrast to the Pharisees' reception of Jesus, to the Pharisees' appraisal of Jesus. What's this man doing? He's recognizing the authority of Jesus. The Pharisees, not at all. All right, Matthew says the centurion came. All right, so if Matthew says he came, but Luke tells us that he didn't come, how do we reconcile that? You don't know. So in that day, somebody that came on the behalf of another, in the name of another, was considered as though that person was there themselves. That's why Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, you go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Or teaching everything, I already mentioned it. Teach them everything, to observe everything that I've commanded you. Making disciples of all men. See, he says, I'm giving you my authority, and as you go, it'll be as though I am the one going. Because you're going in my authority. So that's how Matthew is treating that. It's not that Matthew and Luke are contradicting one another. It's Matthew recognizes that it's as though he had gone himself with these representatives that went in his name. So look at Jesus' response in verse 9. He says, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd, I've not found such great faith, not even in Israel. He's saying, if you expect to see great faith, you would expect to see it in Israel. But this is a man who's not even a part of the nation of Israel. And look at his great faith. So, in one sense, it's a rebuke. In another sense, it's an encouragement. Follow this man's lead. Trust like he does. Trust implicitly, explicitly. And so those who were sent returned to the house, and they found the servant, the one who had been sick. He's now well. Matthew brings another aspect into this. When Jesus speaks about the faith of this man, let's come to Matthew's account in chapter 8. So when he says, I've not found such great faith, not even in Israel, look what he says in verses 11 and 12. Craig, please.
I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac. All the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. That place.
Wow. What's Jesus saying here?
Even though they are
Okay. All right, yeah. Now, who are the ones that he's speaking about? They'll come from the east and the west, and they will sit down or recline with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Gentiles. And then he says, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out. Who are the sons of the kingdom? The Jews. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that you and I, if I know we're not Jews, but we might automatically make the leap or draw the conclusion that if the Jews weren't secure in the kingdom, then, and if we're part of the kingdom of God through trust in Jesus Christ, His salvation, does that mean we can get kicked out of the kingdom? No, of course not. So, what is Jesus speaking about here? If there's no jeopardy of us being kicked out of the kingdom as followers of Jesus Christ, what was the jeopardy here? How is it that the sons of the kingdom in verse 12 were going to be cast out of the kingdom? They didn't believe in Him. They didn't accept Him as Messiah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's he saying when he says they will come from the east and the west and they will sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven? What's the picture that he's giving there that his audience would have picked up on easily and knew exactly what he's referring to, that we might have a tendency to miss here in our Western mindset? Okay, people all over the world, but what is he saying that they're going to do when he says they will sit with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Okay, so that's our Western mindset.
Well, I think it's almost like
You're right.
family.
Okay, kinship. Yep. So let's look at one word in particular. So the ESV will say that many will come from the east and the west, and they will what? Recline. What does it say in the NIV? Somebody take their place at the feast. That's a big thing there. So they will recline. Other translations say they will sit. What it means is there is going to be a huge feast. A feast refers to that where if you eat together in the Middle East, it means that you've come together as family. You come under my roof, you come under my protection. A meal binds us. And this is a reclining so that there's intimacy, there's relationship, there's connection, there's vulnerability. There's all of these aspects that are taking place, and that's what Jesus is referring to. So the Gentiles are going to come in. They're going to recline at the feast, and those that think themselves to be sons of the kingdom. Remember last week we looked at that the Pharisees believed that just because you are a son of Abraham or descendant of Abraham, you are automatically in the kingdom. And then if you observe the law of Moses, then you will have places of honor in the kingdom. So Jesus said, wide is the gate, broad its way that leads to destruction. What is he referring to specifically there? The way of the Pharisees. Their self-righteousness, man-made righteousness. So to them, and he also said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you will in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. And here Jesus is reiterating that in the context of a Gentile who acknowledges his authority. So Jesus says there's going to be not only Jews, but also Gentiles that will be coming into the kingdom, but the means of coming into the kingdom is by faith. Faith in the Messiah and the righteousness that He alone gives. So this is the focus that He's giving in this interaction that's taking place here. Let's move on. Luke chapter 7 still. We're going to look at verses 11 to 17.
Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the coffin, and those carrying it stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," he said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country.
All right, so Jesus, the day after, he goes to this city called Nain. Where is Nain? Deb, can you bring that up on the screen, please? Here is Nain. You don't see it? All right, I'm just going to show our online study participants. Nain is here. Nain, come on down right there. You see it? That's Nain. From Capernaum? Yeah, that's about 25 kilometers or so. Pardon me? Capernaum. Capernaum. All right, so he goes the next day to Nain. Why does he go to Nain? All right, is that the only reason he goes to Nain? The comment over here was that he went to raise this dead man from the dead. Is that the only reason he went to Nain? I'm just going to bring your attention to this. So he's, pardon me? No. Because after this, he's going back to Capernaum, or the northern part of the Galilee. All right, so see if I can get. All right, so this is where we are at on our map. You can see it on the screen, but I just wanted to give it to you topographically, all right? This is the hill of Mori. Right, the hill of Mori. Nain is on the northern slope of this hill. The hill's about, 1,100, 1,200 feet tall. So it's not a mountain per se, but it's a good-sized hill. And let's come to the next slide. This gives you an idea of the city of Nain today. This was not a picture of when Jesus was there.
Water place. That's a long ways for you to walk.
A long ways? So that would be looking at it from this direction. Okay. Yeah, so the Jezreel Valley. So Jezreel Valley is here, and he's looking. It's there to be looking at it from the west.
It's called Nain.
Yes. Let's have one more look at. Pardon me. Nain means home. Now, this has Nain on the left-hand side of your screen. So that means that would be looking north. You're looking at it from the perspective of this way. Okay, you're looking at that this way. Now, I want to come back to the first slide that we were looking at. Please and thank you. The day after that, Jesus went into the city called Nain. When he came near the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother. And there's nothing else spoken here in this account other than Jesus encountered this dead man and he raised him back to life. So, why did Jesus go to Nain? To raise a dead man. See, and it's not like Jesus went on Facebook that morning and saw that there was a death announcement of this young man. And it wasn't like the obituary was put out and visiting hours are such and such time and burial or internment will be at such and such cemetery at such and such date. For Jews, they bury their dead within 24 hours of death. So they don't embalm, and because they don't embalm, they bury generally before sundown. In rare instances, it might be carried through to the next day if the person died like right on, coming on to sundown, or late in the afternoon, and the feasibility of going to the place of burial just isn't possible. So it's not like Jesus heard about this through the grapevine. How did he know to come to Nain? Yeah, because everything that Jesus did, he came to do the will of his Father. He didn't do anything of his own initiative. Nothing on his own initiative. So everything he did it as the Father spoke and led him to do so. So he is going to Nain specifically to raise this man to the dead, from the dead, back to life. Interesting. Why this story? Why Nain? I mean, he raised other dead people. John says at the end of his gospel that Jesus did so many miracles that I suppose if you were to write about all of them, the books, all the volumes in the world couldn't hold all the things that Jesus did. So no doubt he raised more than just a couple of dead people. So why do we have this account in Nain rather than telling us about a dead person that he raised in, Nazareth or some other place? Okay, it's a picture of his own death and resurrection. Expound on that. Okay, son of a widow. Jesus was the son of a widow. And Mary, of course, was a widow at the time of his death. He's resurrected. Yeah, exactly. Now, when they say a coffin, it's not a coffin like you and I think of. This was not a box. This was a platform, a burial platform, if you will. A bier, or bier, beer. Depends on your pronunciation of it. Bier, beer. So it's basically a platform upon which this young man is laid out upon. They're carrying him upon their shoulders, and they're taking him to the place of burial. All right, let's look at a couple of things regarding Nain. Where is it located? Have a look at the map again. And I want you to pay attention that it's on the hill of Mori. Pardon me? I'm going to bring our attention to that in just a second. In the meantime, would you mind just highlighting, Deb, with the pointer, the southern slope of Mori? So there's one city or village that is shown on there on the southern slope. Can anyone see what it says? It's pretty small. Oh, come on! All those sharp eyes. No, just the dot of the city. What is it? Shunem. Shunem. This is the city of Shunem. What comes to mind with Shunem? What comes to mind with the Shunammite? The woman, lady whose son, what? Was raised to life again. Yeah, so Elisha, not Elijah, Elisha, he had his home base, if you will, his ministry base was at Mount Carmel. Now, what famous thing took place at Mount Carmel? The showdown with the prophets of Baal, fire from heaven, but not with Elisha, but Elijah. So to make the difference, Eliyahu and Elisha. All right, so Mount Carmel is on the Mediterranean, right on the coast. Shunem or Mori, the hill of Mori is right here. So on the map, it's just off the map on the screen. So here is Mount Carmel. I'm showing it to our on screen, and I will show you as well. Took our pointer. All right. All right, so looking at the screen, where the blue, the Mediterranean, comes to the lowest point, that is where where Mount Carmel comes out. All right, so you can see that. Okay, so Mount Carmel is where Elisha had his home base, and he would travel frequently through the Jezreel Valley. So he would travel past Nazareth. He would come and he would travel past Shunem, and he would stop there because that was a good day's travel. And this woman said to her husband, the man of God, he comes here often, let's build a room onto the side of our house for him so that he can stay when he travels. So that's what they did, and he stayed, and then he blessed them and said, the Lord is going to visit you and you will have a son. Well, sometime later, this is in 2 Kings chapter 4. Second Kings chapter 4. So this is the passage that deals with this account, and we will have a look, not reading the whole thing, but just so that we're aware of it, really verses 8 on to verse 37 is the account that takes place. All right, so the woman conceives in verse 17, and the child grew, verse 18. This is 2 Kings chapter 4. One day he went out to his father to the reapers, and he said to his father, "My head, my head." So he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." Verse 20. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door upon him, and what did she do? Okay, so let's do it summary style. Just have a look there and see what happens. She ends up taken off right then, going to Mount Carmel. And she doesn't stop for anything. And by the time she arrives, verse 25, are we at Carolyn? Can you look at that?
So she sat out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, "Look, there is the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right?'" "Everything is all right," she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why." "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord?" she said. "Didn't I tell you, don't raise my house?" Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tuck your cloak into your belt. Take my staff in your hand, and if you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face." But the child's mother said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave." So he got up and followed her.
All right, let's stop there. Interesting. First of all, she goes, Gehazi runs out to meet her, and he says, "Is it okay? Is it all right with you? Is it well with you, your husband, your son?" And what does she say? It's all well. But the word is shalom. So he says to her, "Shalom," and she says, "Shalom." What does shalom mean? Peace, more than that. You're right, but it means more than that. Complete well-being. It encompasses more than just peace or well wishes. Shalom is the concept of all is well in my spirit, all is well in my body, all is well. It's peace. Everything is settled. Why does she say, yes, shalom, when her son is dead? Deal with it with the man of God first. Good guess. What are these words of? They're words of faith. So she's not dismissing the man, at least as far as I see it. It could be. I mean, some people would just say, "You know what, I don't want to deal with it right now." Yes, shalom. Okay, now leave me alone. I need to get to what's really important here. Yes. She's in bitter distress, but she is trusting. She's walking in faith. Why is she in distress? Because her son's dead, right? But she's trusting him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be coming to the man of God. Trusting that God can do something, can raise the boy to life. If God can open her womb and bring life, He can just as easily as restore life. So what did Elisha tell Gehazi to do? Take this and put it on my bed. Take my staff. Pardon me? No? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, put it on the boy's face. I was back still in Mount Carmel in my mind. All right. Yes, put it on the boy's face. What does this speak of? What does the staff speak of? His authority. And you see the staff in the Old Testament, often it points to not just authority, but it points to cross. But it didn't work. All right, so what is he doing here? It's not that the staff had power in and of itself. It represented his authority, but he came in person, putting the two together. And what does he do? He stretches himself upon the boy. He doesn't know what to do. He prays. Now, it's important to see that he doesn't just say, all right, go home and your son will live. He doesn't go with the woman and arrive and say, okay, young man, arise. What does he do? He waits. He's like, God, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here with this woman. The Lord has hidden it from me. And then he's not sure what to do when he arrives. Verse 33. He shuts the door behind the two of them and he prays to the Lord. He lays on the child, puts mouth to mouth, eyes on eyes, hands on hands, stretched himself out on the child. And the flesh of the child became warm. He walked back and forth in the house and went and did the same thing again. And then the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes and restored his son back to his mother. Notice where this takes place. In Shunem, which is on the southern slope of the hill of Mori. Why did Jesus come to Nain? On the northern slope of the hill of Mori. Why didn't you just wait for somebody to die in Shunem and do this if he's going to... This is in fulfillment of what, or of a shadow that had taken place 800 years earlier when Elisha raised this woman's son. It's because Shunem ceased to be a city by the time of Christ. So the only city that is there that has connection to that is the city of Nain, which is only a few thousand feet away on the other slope of this hill. So with Jesus coming and he raises this boy to life, what are they automatically thinking and connecting it to from their history? Their personal history. The Shunammite woman's son.
What town is there?
At Shunem, it's now been repopulated or reestablished, and it's a form of the name of Shunem. Yes, it's an Arab town. So this is what takes place there. The hill of Mori. There's more significance. In chapter 8 of 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 8. Chapter 8, yes. Now, before you look at any headings there for a second, does anybody know what's going on in 2 Kings chapter 8? Don't look. Don't look. If you look, don't say it, all right? What's going on in 2 Kings chapter 8? Any idea? Is the story of this boy and his mom, is it true? Have you looked?
Yes, I did.
All right, so I said, if you've looked, don't speak. See if we can get those that haven't looked. See if we know the story. All right, here's what's going on. Let's come chapter 8. Let's read verses 1. Let's read 1 to 3. One to 3.
Now Elisha had said, "Go away to your family, wherever you can." Because the Lord has decreed a famine
All right. One more.
Oh yeah. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land and went to the king to beg for her house and land. King was taken
All right, that's good right there. All right, so what's taking place? So before her losing her land, that's not the focus just yet. The focus at the beginning is what? A famine comes upon the land. Elisha says to the woman, all right, leave the land for now and return when the famine is over. Now, he didn't just say that in the timeline of chapter 8. There's been a famine in the land, and the famine has become even more intensified in Samaria when the Syrians have come and laid siege to the city of Samaria. And this is the case when there are 4 lepers, and the Lord had caused a sound to be heard in the camp, and they took off, and these lepers went and found all of this the spoils that had been left behind. Well, this woman and her family have already gone, prior to this, at the beginning of this famine, they've gone to the land of the Philistines. Where's that? Now remember, they're living in Shunem up here. So Shunem is in this region of Israel. And he said, now go and find refuge elsewhere. And what does she do? She goes to the land of the Philistines, which is on the coastal plain down in this region. So she comes down here, very fertile area. And it was unaffected by the famine that's going on up here, which should be a fruitful area. What does the valley of Jezreel, what does the name mean? Fruitful. Jezreel means fruitful. But there's a famine. Why is there a famine? Because of their sin. They turned their backs on God. Remember with Elijah, he pronounced a famine, and during his ministry, the famine lasted how long? 3.5 years. This one lasts 7. It's interesting that Elisha had asked for a double portion of the mantle or the spirit that had been put on Elijah, and that to his miracles, when you count, including even when the dead man touched Elisha's bones, his dead bones in the grave, that the man came back to life, double the amount of recorded miracles that Elijah had accomplished or had accounted for. And that even to the point of the famine is double in length of time to the one that Elijah had experienced. But it's interesting, she goes where? To the land of the Philistines. It's interesting that you go to the land of your enemies to seek refuge during a time when you should really be experiencing the blessing of God where He's planted you. It's not unlike Ruth and Naomi, Naomi before Ruth, Naomi and her husband, 2 sons, when they left Bethlehem down here. And where did they go when the famine hit? Where? Moab, which is just across the Dead Sea. All right? So it's not very far away, but they're experiencing still fruitfulness while Bethlehem is experiencing famine. So not unlike they're experiencing famine up here in the Jezreel Valley, and she goes down not all that far away, but she's gone for 7 years. While she's gone, those that remained in the land, they basically confiscated her property and got the proceeds for themselves. But God is a God who redeems, isn't He? This woman did not turn her back on the Lord. She followed the Word of God while the Lord is dealing with those that had turned their back on the Lord. She hears that the famine's over. She goes back home. As she's returning home, Gehazi, who is Elisha's former servant, is talking to the king. And the king just so happens at that time to be saying, Gehazi, please tell me about some of the things that Elisha had done. So this is coming into verse 4 of 2 Kings chapter 8. So the woman returns went to make an appeal to the king for her house and her land because they've been usurped. So the king is telling Gehazi, verse 4, tell me all the great things Elisha has done. So he begins saying about Naaman and the oil and all the other things that had taken place. And just as he begins talking about the fact that he raised this woman from Shunem, that she walks in to the king's court, or the king's gate, the gate of the city. And Gehazi says, speaking of this woman, here she is right now. Now it's interesting, it speaks of the woman, but not the woman and her husband or son, but not speaking of her husband, which can seem to imply that perhaps she is widowed by this time. So there's a further carrying forward with the comparison when Jesus raises the widow in Nain whose son had died. And she only had one son. The widow from Nain only had one son. What does the king do when he hears her situation? So he said, this is verse 6. So why don't you read verse 6, Melissa, please?
The king asked the woman about it, and he assigned officials in her case. In fact, everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land, from the day she left the country until now.
All right. So it's amazing that he restores to her everything that had been taken. Restores the land, even the proceeds of all that had been sold, all that the land had made, the revenue that the land had made over the past 7 years, make sure it goes into her account. It's quite possible that the king himself was one of the ones that had taken use or confiscation of this property. But he has to obey the word of the Lord. I can't help but seeing that this foreshadows the work of what God does on behalf of those who trust in Him, who say, how is everything? And they say, shalom. And not because they're denying reality, but because they're putting their faith in God. And so Jesus comes to the woman at Nain, this widow, just a few thousand feet on the northern slope, on the other side of the hill of Mori, and He restores to her son. Because in that culture, she being a widow, and now she's childless, especially without a son, and this son was an older son, then what does that mean for her? If it stayed that way. If this son remained dead, what does that mean for her? No income. She's going to be destitute. So what is Jesus doing? He's restoring her son and her well-being, to take care of her. Jesus is bringing life back, not only to this family, but to this entire village. Because they've come face to face with the living God. Their response here is in the lines of, a great prophet has risen up among us. God has visited His people, back in Luke 7 and verse 16. But He's more than a prophet, because when Jesus deals with this dead man, it's different than what Elijah did. Elijah, first of all, because he raised a dead son to life. Elisha raises a dead son to life. But in both cases, they had to pray to the God who gives back life. Jesus didn't have to pray, He just spoke. Young man, get up. But in their minds, they can't figure it all out. Surely God has raised a prophet among us. What else happens at Mori? There's at least one other thing that's of worth. In Judges chapter 7, Gideon. Now I'm just going to make reference to that. The Midianites, they're camped out at the hill of Mori on the northern slopes. On the northern slopes, which would be the city of Nain. And where is Gideon camped out? On the north or southeastern slopes of the hill of Mori. Opposite sides, but Gideon would be down a little bit more in the valley where there is. Can you bring that up on the screen? I'm just going to bring this up for online. So Nain is on the left, Shechem is on the bottom, but literally you see that there is a stream that runs down there. That's the stream of Harod. Okay, so can you bring it back to the first? There we go. There we go. You see the stream below? I'll just take that just for a second. We have the hill of Mori right here. Nain is here, and so on the northern slope we've got the Midianites. You're right, folks. Sorry. We have the Midianites that are here, and on the southern valley, this part is the valley of Harod, which is where the brook is that Gideon had taken his men, the 10,000, and God whittled them down to 300. So against insurmountable odds, God gives victory. And death, most certainly, is insurmountable odds, aren't they? And this is what we see here. One last thing is that here is the hill of Mori. Here is Mount Gilboa. On Shechem, at Shechem in 2 Samuel chapter 28, I think it is, the last chapter, the third last chapter, that the Philistines are camped at Shechem. Or Shunem, Shunem, the hill of Mori. Saul is camped on Mount Gilboa, right down here. Shunem, Mount Gilboa, Mori, Philistines, Saul. And what happens? Saul is killed in battle and he's slain in battle, mortally wounded, and he takes his life. But he's still defeated by the Philistines. And this is a picture of the flesh being defeated. Because who comes up in his place? David, a man after God's own heart. And David is a picture of Christ. So we see that the very one who was symbolized by David is now back in this region where he had brought victory to Gideon, brought life where there was certain death. Why was Gideon hiding and threshing wheat in a wine press? Because the Midianites, they were oppressed. They were coming and stealing all of their supplies. Where did Gideon live? Where was his home? Right here in Ophrah, which is just to the west of the hill of Mori. So, right in this region right here, Ophrah. And what did God do? He visits him, and they are facing certain death because the Midianites are robbing from them all the time. And that means their livelihood, it means their crops, their sustenance. And as a result, God says, I have chosen you, mighty man of valor. Why was he mighty? Because God was with him. And God gave him the victory against insurmountable odds. And this is what Jesus does when he comes to the hill of Mori, not just to Nain, but the hill of Mori, which is so rich in history. And he does it by touching this very point, which is almost a repeat. When Elisha raises the woman from Shunem, her son, Jesus 800 years later does the same thing. It's like he comes in, he's not just coming in to see how things are going. He knows what's going on. And he's coming there to make a difference and to bring life where he goes. One last thing, it's interesting that back in Luke chapter 7, it's the first time in verse 13, First time that Jesus in the book of Luke, in Luke's Gospel, is referred to as the title Lord. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. He said, "Do not weep." He's showing his lordship in giving, in his strength and his authority over death. And in verse 17, this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. Nain not only means home, but it also means pleasant. And Shunem means a double resting place. There's a lot of richness that's going on in this region, and why Jesus goes there, intentionally there, and no other business except to raise this woman's son back to life, and then he goes back to his base of ministry in the north. And it's the only place where Nain is mentioned by name in the Scriptures. Yes. Mori means archer or teaching. But Jesus was going there to teach a lesson. Show them who he was. Strength. Power. The one thing I would like to say, just in summary, is that when we look at what took place in Nain, God has a big picture. And all that he's doing throughout history is the work of redemption. The big story, the upper story, if you will. But he's involved intimately and intricately in the lower story. The lower story is your story, and your story, and your story together, and your story, and my story, and our story together, and your story, and your story, and your story, your story together, your story, and your story together, your children's story together, and so on. And so Jesus is intimately concerned and involved in our affairs. And so he's working things in this lower story, our individual stories, to work redemption as well, to bring glory to his name. And that's what went on in Nain. And it shows that he is a God who is specific and cares about those that think that nobody cares about them. And reminds us that God sees, he knows, and he's involved, and he's working things out. So, as we go to prayer, let's give thanks to him for that to begin with. And then we will lift these needs